So, good morning, ma'am. On behalf of JCRC 90.8 FM, I'm Shivangi Singhal, your interviewer for today's session. May I kindly request your permission to commence the interview?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
So, as far as I have read your profile and your endless contributions to the legal world, what inspired you to pursue a career in law? And how did you transition into your current role as a legal head?
So, do you want an honest answer? Actually, it was by fluke. I was doing college, and a year into that, I felt that it wasn't possibly what I wanted to do. So, I gave my law exam. I got through, and I started studying law. Until third year, I felt that I didn't want to do that. So I went in for an internship with PepsiCo at that time, and there I met my mentor still, called V.R. Shankar, who at that time was the VP for legal, and now he's the global general counsel for the Aditya Birla Group. So he is the one who inspired me because I wanted to be him. And that's how I think my path started in that direction. And of course, after that, I joined a law firm for 7 years. Again, for GE, what really happened was that I had my first daughter, and it became very difficult to. I was staying in Gurgaon, and I had to go way back to Delhi for work. So it became very difficult for me. So I tried applying in-house. Now back then, they wanted you to have prior in-house experience, which is not the case now. So it was very difficult for me to find a job. Finally, GE came along. I had to downgrade my profile because there was no other option. In fact, the interviewer told me that you're overqualified for this position. And I said, it's okay, I will manage. And I took that leap of faith. I just felt that I will make it to the top. I just need to get in first. That had to be the opportunity I had to take. So I got in and I worked my way up. So 9 years and 5 leadership awards later, I'm here. It's a long answer, is it?
Excellent, ma'am. So, my next question would be, can you share some of the key responsibilities and challenges you faced in your role and how you navigate them?
So I think you said the key challenges. So, as an in-house counsel, you're playing many roles. You're many things at once. It's not like it's in a law firm where you are just giving legal advice. Somebody will come to you, somebody will give you a problem statement, and you will research and you will give legal advice, which more often than not is going to be conservative. For an in-house counsel, you're playing multiple roles. You're a business advisor, you're a business enabler, you're a strategic advisor, you're a risk advisor, you're a stakeholder manager, you're a team leader, you're a dispute strategist. So you're just playing so many roles at one time. There are a lot of challenges that come along, and I think that one challenge is that you're so many things at once altogether. The second challenge would be to take all the functions together as you go along, because there's bound to be a lot of friction, and especially with your sales or your commercial teams, who are the ones who are bringing in the money or the meeting the targets. So when you question what they're doing, or you tell them that this is something you cannot do, it creates friction. So you have to have the right kind of tact to take them along with you, and for them to understand what you're really saying, and have faith that you won't do it every time. You're doing it only when it's required. So, yeah.
Okay. So, how do you foster collaboration and alignment between legal and other departments within the organization?
So I think again the key is that you'll have to sync your you'll have to sync your priorities with that of the business. You'll have to sit down with your stakeholders. You'll have to understand what are their priorities or what are their goals for the next quarter. Are they trying to bring in a particular deal? Are they trying to recover monies from a particular customer? What is that amount of money, etc. So once you know their goals and their priorities, you will sync your priorities along with that. So that's what helps.
So, how do you prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion within your legal department and in the broader organization?
So my team is an anomaly. We have all women and just one male member. So, but yes, GE is very specific and very focused on diversity and inclusion. In fact, in our Dubai office, we actually hired a 5-month pregnant woman. So we knew she's going to go on leave in the next 3 months or so, but we still hired her. The idea is to send a message that, it's not a burden to be carrying a child. And otherwise, when we're working with law firms also, at least I tend to ask them that how many women do you have on your team that I'm going to use? So I want a diversity in that team that is going to work on my assignments and matters. So yeah, I think the idea is to be able to spread the word or spread your message across to how many ever people you are in contact with.
This is nice to see such a larger number of women in our office rather than men.
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you share a particularly challenging legal issue or case you have encountered in your career, and how do you address it?
Challenging in my career. You're asking me all the questions that I'm supposed to cover in the expert lecture. So either they can hear the radio or they can hear the lecture. But anyway, challenging situation. A practical experience, is it? So there was a flood at one of our sites, and a lot of the goods and materials got submerged and damaged in, thank you so much, in water. So one challenge was that we had to extract all our people from there, and other people also, whether it was the customers, employees, whoever we could really help. And once that was done, you had to think about strategy. You had to think about whose obligation is it to maintain the health and safety of the site? What is my obligation towards the customer? Whether I can suspend, how long can I suspend for? What are the kind of costs that I will incur if I suspend? Since it was a flood, what was the force majeure clause that we're looking at? Under what particular force majeure event can I cover that? And how do I make my case for it? So those are all strategies that come along, but a flood is not a run-of-the-mill matter or event that happens every day. So it's challenging, of course.
Okay. So, with a background in arbitration, what is your approach to managing conflicts or disagreements between parties during arbitration proceedings?
So I think the first step always is not to go into arbitration. So you will always try other means. You will now mediation is coming up, but before that you tried settlement. Now possibly you can try a mediation or a settlement through a formal mediator. And what was the second part of the question?
Disagreements between parties during arbitration proceedings.
You need to maintain your cool, because you will come across a lot of people on the other side who are going to try to antagonize you. And more or less they may maintain decorum, but it does, during cross-examination specifically, it can get a little heated. So you need to maintain your cool. When the witnesses are being examined, you really need to contain yourself and not object for every single thing. You will have to pick your battles where you can really put your point across, even if you have to put it in an aggressive manner somewhere. So yeah, so disagreements between parties, that's how you deal with it.
Okay, ma'am. So, with your leadership contributions to the Global Renewable Women's Network, especially in initiatives promoting inclusion, diversity, and equality, and mental health awareness, what role do you see leadership playing in driving cultural change and creating environment that prioritize inclusion, diversity, and mental health support within organization?
So I think it's a lot about training and awareness. So as the part of the leadership team, we conducted a lot of trainings and a lot of workshops for them. For women, we did workshops on leadership. We did workshops on how to manage mental health, stress management, because all said and done, no matter how progressive we think we've become, even now, unfortunately, a lot of the burden lies on women, whether it's household or whether it's motherhood or whether it is, and then you're still expected to manage work in the same way. Also, women are becoming more career oriented, so they want to do it all. So mental health does take a back seat. So that's it's a kind of awareness we create. We try to also do workshops on how to build on your happiness quotient or on your positivity. There are specific exercises, certain daily practices that you should do to be able to maintain your equilibrium and maintain it on the high level of positivity. So those are things that we do.
So how do you think women can break barriers and be more active in the unconventional fields?
I think it just requires courage. It requires perseverance, a lot of perseverance. And yes, a support group around you who's going to encourage you to do it. I don't say you can't do it without a support group, but it becomes a tad easier if you have a support group around. So, and especially family, if they're not encouraging of you working, or your husband is going to supposedly not allow you to work after marriage, or you need to give up work after you have a child, those things matter. And so there's this book that I'd read called The Wife Drought. So that completely revamped the concept and the definition of wife. So what it said in that, it was by an Australian author who said that a wife is a person who takes care of all the domestic activities of home, and she's unpaid. It's a she or a he, whoever that is the wife. So we actually, it makes one realize that wife is a word that is synonymous with everything. It's synonymous with a woman. It's synonymous with everything that you have to take care of. And a husband is the one who goes to work and he comes back. And thankfully, that's changing now. I am truly blessed and lucky to have a husband who shares all responsibilities with me. He's taking care of our children while I'm traveling. So it is, it starts, the change starts from home. So it definitely has started where I am. It's changed in my friend circle. So it's going to go further. You need to pass the buck. That needs to happen. But it is slow progress. Like they still say that even I think in even by the time we're in 2050, if I've not got it wrong, or 2070, if we do the measures that we're doing now, we will achieve gender equality in 2070. That's the kind of distinction or disparity that already there is, despite all the measures. So it's a long way off, but we need to continue what we're doing and maybe do it at a faster pace.
So, ma'am, can you share any success stories or achievements resulting from your leadership contributions to the network and the lessons you have learned along the way?
Lessons in leadership or lessons in leadership or along the way in terms of the women's network? So I think that when you do these workshops, there is a lot that you learn from the women as well. You understand what challenges they're facing. You hear it firsthand. So it just, it's a rude shock, but it's also an awareness of the environment that we're living in and how much you still need to do. So it urges you to move forward with more of a vigor. And in terms of leadership, I think the lessons I learned was that I read up a lot. Because you want to educate the people around you in the best possible manner with the right kind of information. So, yeah, I guess that in terms of the women network, yeah.
So, in your opinion, what are some key strategies or approaches for increasing the representation of women in leadership positions within the renewable industry?
So that's a point that you've caught actually. In the renewable industry, women are very few. In fact, when I go into conferences, I have not met a single woman who's a general counsel in the renewable sector. Not that they aren't, there are, but they're far and few between. Like if you go on Google and you do a search for them, there are, but there are so few in India. There's really few in India. And I'd not like to say that it's because of the complexity of the projects. I mean, women are just as capable as men are. But I think that it's a relatively new field. It's not something that's being taught in colleges. Women are still, there's a disparity between the men and women ratio, even in law colleges. So it's not a natural progression from college to a renewable industry, because that bridge hasn't been built yet, unless those industries start coming to colleges and doing placements. So that's the only way the natural progression will start, and will start building from there.
So, ma'am, how do you advocate for intersectionality within the global renewable women's network, ensuring that the voices and experiences of all women are represented and included?
I think I've answered that question before, isn't it? Basically, you're talking about representation of women in the renewable sector on a global scale.
How do you ensure that their voices and appearances
Reach. So again, I think possibly it's already been answered in the sense those are the initiatives that we take, right? We train them, we do workshops for them, we do them internally, we call people from outside. The people that we connect with, we also ensure that there's a diversity and inclusion ratio with the people that we connect with also externally. So yeah, that's how we expect the ratio to increase, the disparity to reduce, and for their voice to be heard. Oh yeah, and one more thing, we do a lot of emphasis on unconscious bias training. A lot of that, and so that basically is unconscious bias would really mean that your things that are on autopilot in your mind, and mental shortcuts is a very important function. Research says that we are processing, or we get actually 11 million bits of information per second, and we process only about 40 per second. So you can imagine how much of a role the automated mental shortcuts take, which basically come from your life experiences, from your cultural background, and all of that, right? So unconscious bias needs to be controlled. People need to consciously be aware of the biases they hold because of the backgrounds they come from. And once that is done, automatically, once it's so consciously built in you, you automatically will try to prevent causing that disparity consciously between men and women.
Okay, so being an advocate for mental health awareness, so how this cause personally impacted you?
So it was the reason why I created mental health awareness within the network was because I myself suffer from anxiety, and I think I always had it as a child, but there was no one to tell us what it really was. And then I had the fortune of having a friend who is a psychologist. And she happened to just mention that she also has anxiety. And we were just talking about symptoms. And even then, I did not really process it, but it was something that stayed with me. And then when, maybe a couple of years later, possibly right after maybe COVID, I felt the symptoms again, and I realized that, okay, this is what's happening. And I still tried to brush it under the carpet and try to, do basic things that people do, breathing exercises, meditation, etc. It helped, but it did not help as much. So then I took the step of going to a doctor. I went on medication and I got better. And that's when I realized that I started talking to people about it because I felt it was normal. I did not find it anything to be ashamed of. It's like you get a fever, you take medication, you take it for this as well. But when I started talking to people, I realized that they were coming back and telling me, oh, I have the same thing, or I'm going through therapy, or I'm on medication. And those were really close friends. So I was really shocked that they were going through this and they were doing this for the last few years, but they hadn't talked about it. That's when I realized that it needs to be spoken about. And that's why I took that initiative to do that in-house.
People make a really big deal when you go to see a psychologist or a doctor, yeah. So ma'am, can you explain why mental health awareness is important, especially in today's society?
In today's society, because we're living a very fast-paced life, we don't live a life like our parents lived. It was a 9-to-5 job. You came home on time. You had time for your children. Your work wasn't spilling into your personal space. In fact, इस पे एक शेर है, आई थिंक गुलजार का, कि एक वक्त था जब शामें भी हुआ करती थी, अब तो सुबह के बाद सीधे रात होती है. Which, explains a lot, that you don't even realize when your day ends and, it's all dark outside and you're getting home when your children are asleep. And more so after COVID, because you've started working from home, the barriers have completely lifted and your work is completely spilling over into your personal space. So it's very important to concentrate on mental health now, because it's intruding our personal space. And so it's important to understand, be conscious of it, and take steps if you find something amiss.
How can individuals recognize signs of mental health issues in themselves? And what are the common misconceptions or stigmas surrounding mental health?
So the common symptoms would be that, and the symptoms are different for everybody, But I can tell you some symptoms that I have had, or my close friends have had, or other people that I've spoken to. One would be that you feel like you can't breathe. So sometimes a lot of the times it's mistaken for asthma, but it's not that. You may feel a very, very intense sinking feeling in your chest. You may feel a tingling feeling in your entire body. You may feel a sudden loss of energy. What else? I think these are the most common ones. And what was the second part again? So misconceptions are this: nobody wants to go for medication. They will say ki, the first thing, even now people actually says ki, if you recommend to them that you need to go for medication, the first thing they will come across saying ki, मैं पागल थोड़ी हूँ, लोग मुझे पागल सोचेंगे. Which is not the case. Like I mentioned before, you go to a doctor if you have a bad throat, if you have fever. So you need to understand it's just a bit of an imbalance in your brain. And that imbalance sometimes has to be fixed with medication if other measures don't work. And the second misconception is about therapy. That I don't need a therapist. I have friends to talk to. I have parents to talk to. I have my sister to talk to. It doesn't happen. Sometimes you need a third party. You need a stranger to be able to talk to, because you have no idea the kind of things you would talk about when you know somebody on the other side of the table is listening without judgment and doesn't know you from Adam. So yes, those are the two common misconceptions.
So ma'am, it's really important to first accept that you're having some anxiety attacks, or you're having a mental problem, and it's important to see a psychotherapist or a doctor. Yeah. Okay. So as you have received so many leadership awards, what do these mean to you personally, and how have they influenced your journey and perspective on leadership?
I think it's always an encouragement when the organization that you've given your blood and sweat to acknowledges your work, appreciates your work. So it always eggs you to work better, work harder. And I think that's, like I said, the journey, it just helps encourage your journey along. You're able to see your path forward more clearly. So, yeah.
Okay. So, what inspired you to become an advocate for women in leadership? And what personal experiences have shaped your perspective on this issue?
For women, I think, like I previously said, I still do think that there is a lot of disparity. I see it in a lot of families. They still, question if a woman is working long hours, that, why don't you change your job? And, the statement is made so callously that it's almost like it doesn't matter what you're doing, and you can just hop around if the job doesn't suit your convenience, which is not the case. Women are becoming ambitious and career-oriented, and so you have to allow her the space to pursue that path. They get invariably, if a woman was to travel a lot for work, the first question your family members will ask you is that, what about your children? Nobody will ask a father that, ever, because they're meant to work. So nobody's going to ask that. Have you ever heard, so if you ever go to a party and you're meeting somebody for the first time, what's one of the first things that you'll be asked? Are you a working mom? Have you ever heard the term working dad? You've never heard it. No one says, are you a working dad? No, it's a working mom. She has dual responsibilities, but a man doesn't. And I'm not saying that men are not changing. They're changing. Many of them are changing. But these things are prevalent. There are a lot of unconscious biases that still do exist. In fact, I've had a personal experience where I was at a party and I was standing along with my husband, and there was another man there, and he's having this engaging conversation with me where he's telling me about what work he does. Am I boring you? Okay. He was engaging me in a conversation where, he's talking about his profession, what he does, how he does it, in how many countries has his business spread, etc. And I was talking and humming along and asking all the questions. I was interested in what he was saying. And once there was a lull in our conversation and our conversation was over, my husband was standing to the other side. He looked at my husband and asked him, "So what do you do?" He did not ask me that question. There was no reciprocation of that question, possibly because he assumed that I don't do anything. Or maybe I'm just a stay-at-home mom. So, these small irritants make you feel that it matters. You need to talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, so my last question would be, what would be your advice to the youngsters who are going to pursue a career in the legal field?
So my advice would be that don't pursue perfectionism. Pursue striving for the best, because perfectionism is an unrealistic and an unattainable goal. You will never be able to achieve it, and it's only going to sadden you when you can't achieve it. Instead, strive for the best that you can, and you have to accept the fact that nobody has reached the point that they have reached without making mistakes and without doing any wrong. So all of us have made mistakes. So it's okay to make mistakes. You do not need to be a perfectionist. Just go along with the flow. It's going to happen.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Your words are really motivational, and really, you are now a true inspiration for me. Thank you, ma'am.